So I have to think carefully. Now imagine a British minister trying to do that, right? I think it would be impossible for them to do that. Now, in fact, what's happened is that our national equality body, you know, like here you have is it the National Dalit Commission or something like that? National Minority. You have National Minority
SC/ST Commission.
You have SC/ST Commission. So our equality body is kind of unified. It looks after all the different equalities problems, right? So it's called the Equality and Human Rights Commission. And the Equality and Human Rights Commission actually commissioned a study which reported, there were 2 reports issued in 2014. They said, what we should do, since caste is an aspect of race, we should extend it to the full extent of the Equality Act. No exceptions, no exemptions. So can you see the thinking? Because casteism is a type of racism. Just make the whole act full. Now what happens? I'm proud to belong to a jati, and we have our organizations. I don't know how many of you from Gujarat here? Nobody? Yeah. So have you heard of Visa Oshwal, Dasa Oshwals? You know, we have
they know Patels. They're familiar.
Patels, yeah. So let's talk Patels. Patels have, thank you. Yeah, Patidars, but there are different type of Patidars, right? So there's Chagam, Bavisgam, Satyavisgam. Different groups. Yeah. So you can say, let's say, for argument's sake, that these are jati groups. Each of them has their own registered body, right? Probably a registered charity, and they have a membership system. Once you bring in the fullest extent of the Equality Act, let's say I'm a patidar of one of these organizations, so therefore a member of one of these organizations. Now I'll bring you into some privileged information. My wife is not even Indian, right? She's from Turkey. She's a Kurdish lady from Turkey, right? So she marries me, and this organization has said, sorry, by marriage, we might allow, but in your case, we don't really see you as part of the Jati organization, something like that. So refuse membership. Caste discrimination? It's a case of caste discrimination, right? So next thing you know, she can go to the county court and say, look, these Patel people have discriminated on caste grounds, right? I want damages, right? Now notice this, our Equality Act allows for damages. That's actually the main basis of legal actions under the Equality Act. It's not like the Indian legislation. That's why I was trying to say something specific about the Indian. So the Indian legislation is criminal law, reservations, and incentivization for intercaste marriage, right? At least 3 different types of law. But you in India don't have this open-ended set of litigation claims for damages.
It's coming. It's on the way. There is a bill in the parliament. Anyway.
Do you want to already say something more?
We'll
okay. Okay, we'll talk about it if there's time. But can you see what the UK legislation is doing? It gives an incentive for people to sue, right? And lawyers can actually, in England, lawyers can take can take up cases without charging fees, because they can make taking up the case dependent on what will happen, what damages can be gained from the case, right? Should it win, should it lose? Compensation. So let's say in this case that, the Patel Samaj case, right? What's the likelihood that the Samaj will lose their case? What do you think? 50%? More than 50%? So as a lawyer, I've got a good incentive to push such cases, right? Not only that, actually I can because I know it's an organization, I can really go for them, right? Yes. And they're going to have to pay up. Lots of Patels are so rich, right? After all. So, incentives double, triple, whatever. And I'll get my share, whatever it is, 10, 20%, whatever it is. So lawyers throughout the United Kingdom have already been incentivized, right, to start to think about caste claims. Now, I just want to add something else. You see, while all this legislative stuff has been being argued, and the government of the day didn't want to actually implement it, it's still not been implemented. Now, what's happened as a parallel track, I'll make this quick. As a parallel track, some people have already brought a case of caste discrimination in the British tribunals and courts. So we already have legal authority for the proposition that somebody can make a claim of caste discrimination even though the legislation has not been enacted. You know how? Because they said, oh, well, your Equality Act already covers ethnicity. One of the aspects of race already is ethnicity. Now, in a previous case, the Supreme Court had said that, in a Jewish case, by the way, they said that descent-based discrimination is already covered by ethnicity. Now, the case was something like this. You see, there was a child of mother, a Jewish mother, and as you know, you might know that the traditional Jewish doctrine says that Jewishness, or being Jewish, transmits through the mother. But in this case, the mother herself has converted to Judaism because she wanted to marry the Jewish father, right? So she converted, and it's not easy to convert into Judaism. But then the question was, well, is the child Jewish? Only if the child is Jewish can he or she be admitted to this Jewish school, right? So it's a kind of denominational school, of which we have many in the UK. The school said, no, you're not Jewish enough, right? Parents sue the school. This went to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court says, well, this type of discrimination is descent-based discrimination, which means it's ethnicity-based discrimination, which means it's racial discrimination, right? You can see the direction of travel. Now, in this caste case, which came up, right? Christian lady, she says she's an Adivasi from Bihar, and she came together with the employers from Delhi, right? She was hired in Delhi to act as a servant of the household, whatever, look after children, clean the house, etc. And they came with her to UK. She actually opened a case for underpayment, right? She was being paid low wages or something like that. I mean, you can imagine the situation. She's hired in Delhi. Obviously, she's not going to be paid so much. Maybe the agreement was, okay, she gets accommodation, she gets food, but she doesn't get a huge amount of wages, yeah? Whatever. So she brings a case. After gaining her indefinite leave to remain, which is permanent residence status in the UK, she brings a case to sue the employers. She leaves them, of course. Maybe somebody in her church community or something advised her to do that. At a late stage in the litigation, she suggests, or no, she doesn't suggest, her lawyer suggests that this is also indicative of caste-based discrimination. So there's a new case, right? Now, I'll cut the story short by simply saying that eventually the judges accepted that caste can already be covered by the Equality Act, even though the legislation has not been implemented, because caste-based discrimination is also a type of descent-based discrimination. And because of this Jewish case, we can say that descent-based discrimination is also ethnicity and therefore race-based discrimination. So now, actually, if you're a lawyer in practice in the UK, it's open. Yeah?
You should say a bit about how her caste identified.
Yeah, okay. I will, yeah, because it's a spicy part of the story, actually, right? Now, notice this. If you read, there's at least 3 judgments in the case, because he went from employment tribunal up to employment appeal tribunal, which is the level of high court, and then back to employment tribunal, okay? Did anybody ask this caste status of the employers in the case? Because you'd have thought, right, if there's a case for caste-based discrimination, you need to know the caste background of both parties, right? Trust me, in my reading of the 3 judgments, there's no mention of the
employer.
Yeah.
There is no.
How do you do that? I mean, how do you not want to know, as judges or lawyers, how do you not want to know the caste status of the person who is apparently discriminating on caste grounds? That's rather weird. One of the key facts in the case was that, when she first got hired in Delhi, they already knew her background, and or if they didn't, they should have known. Why? Because she was wearing a white sari with a red border, which is a telltale sign in India of being an Adivasi. Is it true?
Yeah.
Okay, one
But
person.
they bought the story. That's not
Not
the.
actually. I disagree. Because when you go to West Bengal, this is their ethnicity. The festivals and weddings.
When I wrote a blog about this case, if there's time, I'll show it to you. I put this thing, there's a clip from Devdas with the Aishwarya Rai character and the Madhuri Dixit character. Which color sari are they wearing?
White and red.
Thank you. Can you tell the caste from that? Yeah.
Almost not possible.
Yeah, how do you do that? Yeah, it's incredible. But the judges bought that story. I mean, there's other little factoids in the case which, they added on and said, they said, well, it was the kind of, the employers were already looking for the kind of person who, because of a background, would not be expected to do anything except being a servant. Now, how do they know that, right? And what's the link between that and caste? Yeah, I might just be a kind of unskilled person who isn't able to do much else, so I can be a servant, right? Well, does it have necessarily anything to do with my caste background? No. Yeah. I mean, we have a lot of now in the United Kingdom, we have a lot of Filipino ladies, right, who work as carers for children. Throughout Europe, this is the case, actually. They prefer Filipino ladies, right, to look after their kids and become nanny or house servant or something like that. Is it caste-based discrimination? No, it's not. Is it racial? Is it even racial discrimination? The fact that I prefer to have somebody of that background or something like that. I sought out. They actually said she was sought out because of her background. Yeah. So there are all kinds of these suggestions in the account, which if you put together from the 3 judgments, you notice that they're trying to put together a caste discrimination story. Now, one of the most striking things I thought about the case, which actually I didn't mention on Sunday, I think, was the BBC TV, one of the programs on BBC TV, they interviewed her. And they sold it as a caste discrimination story once the case was concluded, right? Now, if you actually carefully follow her interview, she doesn't once mention caste. She doesn't once mention caste. It's the commentator from the BBC who talks about caste discrimination persistently, right? So they're trying to give a particular spin to the story, right? In fact, Jacob Deruva, who I think has been here, talked previously, right? He also suggested to me that, had there been expert evidence in the case, they would have been able to show that in India, there are scheduled castes and there are scheduled tribes. So she's not a member of a caste group, she's a member of a tribal group. So what is it going to do with caste-based discrimination? Of course, in the case, what they tried to do was to say, well, actually scheduled tribes or just tribal groups, right, are in India, are at the lowest of the low kind of thing, right? They put it into the caste pyramid, the typical representation of the caste system, right? Yes, it must be caste discrimination, right? So you can see the layering of these kinds of individual facts, so this is another instance of how, if you don't have the caste system story in the background, this would not be a caste discrimination case at all. You need to have that caste system story first, the colonial or the Christian caste system story, in order for this case to transform itself. And from a legal point of view, actually, you don't even have the evidence. The only way you can do it is by literally jumping to conclusions. It even fails the legal tests. If I was a serious critic of that case, let's say, if the case had been appealed to the Supreme Court and they're very serious, well-educated judges up there, I would have had serious doubts about this case. But somehow that doesn't happen. Yeah? At the Employment Appeal Tribunal, it's the president of that tribunal, which is at the level of the High Court. He's the president who rules on that case. And he doesn't have any doubt. How is that possible? What's going on? Yeah? Now, I'm not saying it's a conspiracy. You might well think that it's some type of conspiracy, but I couldn't possibly say so. Right? Now, just quickly, just to round off the whole discussion about lawmaking and so on. Now, it's not just the UK. If you look at UK is still part of the European Union. If you look at the European Parliament, they've been passing several types of resolutions, right, about caste discrimination and so on. And also there's a bit of, the resolutions are sort of non-binding legal documents like any parliamentary resolution. But there's also some hard law at European Union level which binds all the 28, 29 member states. Right? That hard law is very specific because what it does is it's to do with relations between the EU and third countries with which the EU cooperates. Now, it's mainly in the sphere of so-called development cooperation. And there is a kind of conditionality on caste. So if a partner of the EU, and if an external partner of the EU, with which the EU is dealing, isn't performing properly according to the EU on caste discrimination, they have the right to either renege or renegotiate or whatever, right? Or just hold back on whatever cooperation there, or whether it's money-related stuff or whatever, right? So they can actually make it a condition of their international relations that caste-based discrimination be not present or eliminated or whatever, right? Now, actually, if I was the EU, that would worry me as the EU, right? But somehow you can see how embedded, right, this idea is, right? It's actually almost the fact that Indians systematically discriminate on grounds of caste is, you could say, almost a common sense idea in Europe about India. One of the first things that you hear if you travel in Europe, and you get into a conversation in a Belgian pub or something like that, the people will ask you, you are from India, you have caste system, don't you? This is how frequently you hear this is incredible. In Britain, because we are a polite culture, and English people are generally polite, they might not raise it immediately, right? But just wait for it. Right? It'll come, right? Eventually. And as you see, our parliament has already made it no secret, right? That what they think about India. Right? And our judges have not made it any secret what they really think about India. right? That we are actually systematic discriminators on grounds of caste. That's what we are, right? Should I just stop there and see?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think maybe I've talked for enough time. So maybe to raise some questions?
So now it's open for questions.
So,
Yes.
Question on 2005 Act that you mentioned. You listed a few of those very bad lawmaking. One of them was about it can actually assume anybody whom the scheduled caste or scheduled tribe holds in high esteem.
yeah.
Person living or dead.
Yes,
Just
yes,
open-ended.
yes,
Yeah,
yes.
absolutely. That's the first one.
Yeah.
Second one, if you commit an atrocity against any Dalit or anybody, it also, if you knew that person, if you knew the victim, as in if you are familiar with the victim, it assumes that you knew the caste already. So it puts you directly as a,
Right.
so it automatically assumes that you knew his caste and you intentionally did.
Right.
Who was behind this open-ended, it's a lawyer's delight actually, for interpreting anything and everything, right? Such an open-ended.
Yes. So did I say it's 2005? I should have said
2015.
Yeah.
Sorry, it's 15. Yeah.
That's actually, for me, it remains to be investigated. What the background? How did this actually come into the Rajya Sabha and Lok Sabha, right? Like, where does this legislation? Suspect that it was a creature of the previous administration. I suspect that because it's so soon after the new government forms in the centre that I don't think that they would have had time to actually draft such a piece of legislation.
See,
And plus, we know quite a bit about the previous administration and the kind of people that they had drafting all kinds of laws, right, for them. So Chaitra, you have something specific?
See, this was not drafted by the current government. This was a draft which was sitting in the parliament with the Manmohan Singh government, UPA government, and this was under the heavy advice of that National Advisory Council headed by Sonia Gandhi, was giving a serious input to Ministry of Social Justice and stuff. But the growth of this idea, for example, that doesn't make BJP get away from it. Because if you look at in 2012, one of the issue that we had a conversation about, say Manmohan Singh, for example, one of the problem in 2012 Manmohan Singh raised is that it's a matter of worry that in the Atrocity Act, the conviction rates are low. Okay, it's not the case settlement, it is conviction rates about which they were worried. But courts give the judgment. Right? Yeah. If the conviction rates are low, it is possible that case is not handled properly. It is also possible that case did not stand. I mean, there was no stuff in the case. Exactly. I mean, all kind of possibilities do exist. Okay, this is 2012. 2013, Narendra Modi repeats it. Okay, so there was already by 2013 consensus at national level in the political class that in order to enhance the conviction rate, and mind you, this is largely to do with, police had problem in dealing with atrocity cases. Right. The kind of vagueness, the kind of problems that was associated with it. And the way one of our colleague Duncan have looked at some of the documents, police recommendations to the governments and the law commissions, is saying in order to make these things easy for police to handle the cases, because they need definitive understanding of how to, because they are the implementers, they have to file the FIR. Charge sheet has to be filed by the police station. No, I mean, they're specific, more specific. So that's why you keep defining each of them and certain multiple. Right. Yeah. So all those recommendations which came from implementing authorities were taken up seriously by the Law Commission, and then they were drafted into it. As a consequence, so you make a comment on Krishna, tomorrow you could be sued by a Yadava or a Golla.
Say any person who
deceased
as a god or anything.
No, nothing.
Anybody whom they hold in high esteem.
Absolutely.
I think what you alluded to. Sure.
Anybody.
It's very wide.
I mean, so the scope is that you can sue anybody. You think I don't like you and I belong to scheduled caste. I can simply go and file, and police cannot refuse to file an FIR. And I'm sure I'm going to win the case. Not just win the case. Atrocity Act gives me 5 lakh compensation the moment I file the case. So I mean that's going to happen. So, but the other part that we just mentioned in between the talkers, Shashi Tharoor has pushed a private member bill, the Anti-Discrimination Act. If you must read it, it is there already in the Parliament now. It's a draft, okay, and we suspect that if not tomorrow, day after tomorrow, it will get passed. Okay, if that comes, what we are talking about atrocity acts are very silly. I mean, for any number of reasons, people can be put behind bar. One must take a look at it, and it's an entirely different issue. It's one of the hilarious kind of write-up. I don't think any sane lawyer would, even the most third-rate lawyer would not write such kind of a draft. I mean.
Well, perhaps, I don't know, I would be a bit wary of reaching that conclusion, because the person who drafted it for Shashi Tharoor is an Oxford-based gentleman. He's an Indian origin, Tarunab Khaitan. He's a fellow at one of the colleges in Oxford University, and he also teaches. He started teaching there recently. He's written in support of the UK-based Equality Act and its expression of caste. Not only that, he has said some quite odd things. I mean, when he was writing in favor of this thing. First of all, if you look at the wording of the bill, Shashi Tharoor bill, it uses some of the same language as the Equality Act. It is also an open-ended set of litigation claims, much like the UK Equality Act. Yeah. So it also makes people potentially liable for discriminating against non-vegetarians.
Yeah.
It's not. So one of the protected characteristics is I don't know how they express it exactly, but maybe your food preference or something like that. It becomes a protected characteristic. So if you're a non-veg person, and you come to, I don't know, let's say you come to my Sanstha in UK, because actually as soon as you enter, you'll see a board saying no non-vegetarian food and no alcohol shall be consumed on the premises. You can sue me for some kind of discrimination, right? I mean, this is what happens in UK. I'm sure you have similar things here, right? All over the place. Or a block of flats. You refuse to rent me a block of flats, and this is very common, right?
They put a board. Actually,
Yeah. In India.
Vegetarian,
Vegetarian.
Are you vegetarian? Are you non-vegetarian? I mean, I know several people. In last few days conversations, several people said, yeah, I experienced that, when I was applying for a flat somewhere. The landlord asked me, are you going to cook meat in the house? You see? And I assume, like the UK legislation, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that act also extends to housing provision, as the UK Equality Act does. Yeah, if you discriminate against somebody in the UK when it comes to the provision of housing, let's say a tenancy, you can be sued on racial discrimination grounds, right? Or other grounds, depends on the protected. So, similarly, in India, our act doesn't cover. In UK, our act doesn't cover vegetarianism. This one does, non-vegetarianism. Sorry.
Shashi Tharoor's bill. Yeah.
Yeah.
Jains
So you have.
don't sell flats for anybody else.
Yeah. Jain.
That becomes a discrimination in Shashi Tharoor's bill. Yeah.
So Jains are under. It doesn't matter. Now, okay, you got your minority status, but this one is going to kill you. Yeah, so be careful.
Yes, sir.
Today morning, when I show your profile to my law professor,
Sure.
so
This is not working.
It's working. It's for
Make sure it's on. Yeah.
Yeah. He wondered how is this England guy is using caste system. That was his first reaction. So he saw the book. He saw this is not in India, he told. Caste System Act. So 2015 he was wondering. But going by your statements, I'm a law student. I'm a second year law student. Now, what I feel is that in our society we are largely guarded by several I hope, say caste based. So jati based Swamijis are there. Now already the society is getting divided because of the political interference. So now with this kind of discrimination, probably I believe that it is a strategy, international strategy, to polarize the world. Number one. So it may not directly at India initially, but down the line I believe after some days or years. So I feel that this will once again. It is said that peace exists till another war sets into.
Yes.
Now I believe that the discussion, probably all this law or the apprehensions of the judges or the society what it feels, finally it will polarize the world.
Yeah.
Now what happens is it is a destruction of all or survival of all that can at once it can happen. because it's a nuke world, it's a nuclear world. So now I believe that these kind of things directly lead to what is called as the emergence of new ways of terrorism. Like the caste, using the caste without knowing what now the Aarohi is doing. Aarohi organization is trying to say that there is no basis for using this caste system. But finally, a group of the majority of people, once they accept it, probably it is going to be the monstrous killing of. Now, nobody can escape from that. I believe that.
It's a very good set of comments. Actually, you've said a lot there, and I can't respond to everything. Maybe you don't realize how much you said, but you said a lot, right? I wrote a recent blog article in this. I think it's a News 18, but the newspaper version of this, in which I expressed my fear that the way things are going, particularly with respect to India, we might also already be laying the kind of groundwork for the kind of violence we saw in Rwanda in the 1990s. Right? This kind of caste-based politics and the hatred that it's, not just politics but lawmaking as well, to which it's leading, the hatred that it's generating is going to really go out of control at some point if we are not careful. Sorry.
I just wanted to add up to the point. See, recent Maratha agitation in Maharashtra was anti-SC/ST movement. Absolutely, clear terms. There was no ambiguity because there was a case where a Maratha girl was raped by the scheduled caste member. They wanted to file a case, and these guys went and filed the case on the Parents on Atrocity Act. They belong to Maratha community, and the silent march that really emerged, and it turned, first time Maratha community turned completely opposite of scheduled caste, scheduled tribes. That's one. And see, we are unable to sense the undercurrent hatred that is being generated through some of these laws. See, for example, if you look at the emergence of Pattali Makkal Kachi, PMK, politics in Tamil Nadu, entire 1 year. Now, 1 year today, they are getting into a strong group, and they have become anti-SC/ST, absolutely, which was not the case just 20 years back. And Ambumani Ramdas, politics thrives on anti-SC/ST. I mean, you should look at the number of, murders, brutal butchering, and see the conflict between PMK and Vidathalai Sirathagal that is happening in Tamil Nadu is actually an expression of some of those laws really turning people literally against scheduled caste, scheduled tribe people, whomever is listed in the category, because some third-rate guy goes and files this atrocity case. In general society, people are very happily coexisting.
Yeah.
But suddenly it turns, a certain privilege creates a disadvantage to a certain group of people,
Yeah.
which generates an antagonism, and this is now undercurrent. And we are not taking it seriously. And what we are doing, we are actually strengthening the law,
Yeah.
which is going to add fuel to this course. And it's going to rapidly expand.
Yeah.
So what you said is right. I mean, there is some kind of violence that is going to happen. And we are not in a position to foresee its consequences in the close future. But it's waiting. In my generation, we are going to see it. It's already, signs are emerging in terms of 1 year movement and Maratha movement. There are signs in 2016-17 is very clear. So when it is going to come in Karnataka, when it is going to come in different parts, maybe in Bihar, they're all in queue. Just the matter who will come first in the queue. That's all is the question.
To add your point that in Bihar, Bhumiyar agitation.
Already there is a problem. So Bihar, that's why I said who is in the queue is the question.
Yeah.
Question is not about whether it's going to happen or it's certain it's going to happen if you continue to do this. Question is whether Bihar or Karnataka, who is going to come first is what you have to wait. You want to ask something?
So the question, I'll go later.
Yeah.
I agree that laws which are based on the caste will erupt the violence, anti-SC/ST violence, that's true. But even today, there are many cases like house are burnt, they're killed, they're chopped, just because they belong to the SC or ST. See, we need to address, I mean, simultaneously we have to look into this also. So what are your solutions or the ideas to solve these problems?
Yeah, you see, I mean, one can say that this person was killed for this reason, this person was killed for this reason. But one question we have to ask is, can a general law accomplish different levels of questions. So first level of question has to be, can a general law, which in India for some reason often takes the shape of a criminal law. If I'm not wrong, even the Sashi Tharoor bill has a kind of criminal law underpinning to it.
Yeah.
Whereas the UK law is a kind of civil law, touchy-feely, yeah? But I can take your money, basically. Can a general law inculcate the kind of attitude within society that makes people of different communities treat each other well? So the other thing is that, you see, I can have all kinds of intentions for harming you or whatever, right? If I'm that kind of person, that I'm going to do it on this basis, that basis. The law is not a very good instrument for ascertaining on what grounds I did something, right? I mean, even in UK we have these, base. In fact, the base of criminal law in the Western world is intention-based, but they always have a lot of difficulty. You look at murder cases and so on. There's always this case. The law students here will recognize this problem. What they call the mens rea. Was it the mental intention of the guilty mind that led to the act in question? In that case, we can penalize it more, etc., etc. You know the situation. Now, not all legal cultures in the world have this kind of framework, right? Indian culture actually doesn't predicate the gravity of criminal offenses traditionally on your mental state. Yeah, in fact, it could even be the opposite, that he lost his temper to that extent that we should maybe understand his ferocity or something like that. But anyway, that's the second level, right? So once you start to say, oh, he's killed just because he's an ST or SC, does that, first of all, does it reinforce our caste system story? Or are we only thinking about that as a specific problem because of the presence of the caste system story? Yeah, somewhere it's there in the background of our mind, right? Because the way we are being raised, educated, taught, the way we talk, the way media talks all the time, educational system, etc., etc. Third level is Indian culture, which has for centuries and centuries done without these kind of laws. Is it unable to actually, because Indian culture must have, without legislation in the sense of, or the way in which Europeans developed it over a period of centuries, Indians seem to have devised other ways of solving their problems. Are we saying that those ways of solving problems are dead? Of course, if somebody dies, you can't bring their life back, right? If somebody's house burned, maybe you can help them to rebuild it or something like that. But there are all kinds of ways of improving relations between human beings without resorting to legislation and the police and the criminal courts, right? Or even the civil courts for damages, right? Because that might actually be a continuation of a social conflict in a different guise. Litigation is continuation of a social conflict. It's not a way of solving it. It's a continuation of social conflict in another guise. So we've got to think, underlying these problems are larger problems of how we think about law in India in particular, right, as compared to the West. And a lot of the presuppositions of how the West has dealt with law and created law and legal systems, legal frameworks, seem to have seeped into India, particularly since the colonial period, without it being thought through exactly whether, the suitability in the Indian conditions. And what's also striking is the prevalence of criminalizing. Why have Indians always been criminal? Even if you look at the dowry law, criminal law, dowry law, this harassment law, all these mothers-in-law are being taken by the police, criminal law, right? Caste atrocities, criminal law. What is this? Are we trying to teach Indians a harsher lesson than other people in the world? Right? This actually you can also say is a sign of colonial consciousness, that the continuous reference to criminal laws for teaching Indians a lesson, because they seem to be unable to learn it otherwise. We have to use the danda, proper danda, but continuously, and in all kinds of social issues as well. Why? Sorry, Chaitra, I went on a bit longer.
No, I just will quickly add up the problems of deciding. See, we have all kind of problems in the society. Sometimes there are groups fight with each other. There are jatis which have rivalry. Sometimes the conflicts are nothing to do with jati at all. Now, if you have a law which is codified, one standard, then that does not give you scope on how to deal with what case by case. Law doesn't permit you to do so. I will take you an example of an atrocity case. Couple of years back in Mysore, there is a place outskirts of Mysore called Siddharamanhundi. There was an atrocity case which was filed in a saloon that somebody was not allowed to saloon because he belonged to scheduled caste, right? Now, there were a lot of debates around it, and our students also sat. 10-15 kilometers away from that place is Mysore city where I studied my undergraduate. Nobody ever asked me, what is your jati when I went to saloon. I have not seen any saloon person asking me. So, in a way, if you buy to caste system story, so now the caste system exists in Siddharamanhundi but doesn't exist 15 kilometers outside. But the problem with law is the law requires one story, an overarching story for the whole of India, that there exists a caste system. Imagine, let for time being assume that in Siddharamanhundi there is caste system, in Mysore it doesn't exist, for an argument. Now law cannot deal with this problem. Now, second point, burning somebody's house on whatever ground, it's a criminal problem. It's there are already, CRPC gives you enough opportunity to deal. You don't need caste-based laws to deal with it. Okay, so there are enough opportunity legally to deal with it. Why create these extra laws?
In a way, whoever's doing it has to answer the question, why is it a special crime? What makes it a crime which is special above and over and above other types of crime?
Yeah.
So firstly, let me express it was an honor to be attending this. Sir. Thank you so much. So, pleasure, sir. So actually now I have two questions drawing attention from what the gentleman asked. So with your permission, I'd like to place in front of you two questions, sir. Yep. So number one is regarding the identity he spoke. Identity as far as burning the houses, yes, that can be identified, and CRPC has plethora of laws for the same. But what would you do for an issue like Beam-Koregaon dispute where both the parties are equally blamed? Where does actus facitoria, mensitoria come into picture here? And number two, sir, this was my original question on record, sir. So with respect to caste system, forgive me if I sound a bit radical here, but sir, considering that India has the roots for the caste system that is being spreading around the world, and considering that caste system in India has a great impact on Indian political scenario, while you have one caste which is very chauvinistic and while you have a few castes which is very possessive and exaggerating the situations at hand and making exorbitant demands, do you think that elimination of caste system as a whole will be a good solution for the betterment of social, economic and political scenario in India? And also with this, can we, and by eliminating caste system in India, will this also be advantageous on our side to stop the contagiousness of caste system and the horrendous impact that it is doing around the world?
Okay, let's go a bit slowly. Yeah? I'm not saying that there's no jati. I never make that claim. It's difficult. It might, as Chaitarji was saying, oh yes, of course it's difficult to define what jati is. Right? If you really want a scientific explanation of what jati is, it's going to be difficult for you to provide it, right? Because we are not in that position. But that level of ambiguity should warn us about actually basing laws on that kind of thing. Secondly, I never said there's no such thing as caste. I'm still prepared to accept that when you start to use these European labels for Indian social phenomena, you might have some problems, right? Because it still begs the question, how does jati translate into caste, right? Because caste actually brings in a whole sort of European baggage, right? Now, third level is caste system. Even if we accept that there is such a thing as caste, what makes it evidence of or an indicator of or the result of something we call the caste system, right? Now, I don't know if you were here earlier on when we started the talk and Chaitarji was giving some background to our research program. He mentioned that actually within the framework of our research program, we say that there is no caste system. Even if we accept that there is caste and jati, we say there is no caste system because caste system only exists as a kind of entity that was created, manufactured by Europeans as a result of their experience of India and as a consequence of the kind of Christian structures of knowledge that they carried around with them, which enabled them to organize material which they saw in India, the data that they saw in India, as if it told them a story about the caste system, right? With the priests at the top and the Brahmin, the so-called priests at the top, and different layers of society, and then people at the bottom, and systematic oppression, indication of corruption at a larger level, an Indian version of Asian despotism, which they thought the Chinese and others had, and so on. So it fitted into a nice package of stories that the Europeans had already if you like, either the equipment to create or actually had already created for themselves. Jaitriji also said that there were debates in Europe going on at that time about the Jews and the Catholics, which the Protestants were having, right? And it's part of that, the framework which led to those kind of discussions, right? Which is a very specific ideological and religious framework, which gives rise to the caste system story as well. It provides the equipment. Without that framework or that argument that was going on in Europe, the caste system story would have been completely implausible, even to Europeans, right? And then, of course, there's the added dimension of the imposition of the idea of the caste system, which we say is a result of the colonial consciousness. Indians, Chaitra, you already mentioned this, accepted stories told by Europeans of their experience of India as if they told facts about India, right? They told about the real social structures, culture, etc. of India, right? So I hear a lot of young people nowadays talking in the way that you do, but what we are trying to say is that start to think in the absence of this caste system story, how does Indian social reality look? Right? Again, we don't deny let me read. This is, some of you familiar with this?
Yeah.
Sociology textbook.
Yeah.
PUC.
So, because I don't know much about India, I started to read this, right? So I educated myself about.
I wrote an exam on that.
Great, caste system. Look at this, yeah? Just kind of illustrates one of the points, it's a very minor point that I made earlier. In the glossary, at the end, it explains a number of terms. Point number 6 is caste, yeah? It's going in alphabetical order. Number 6 is caste. What is caste? A form of stratification in which an individual's social position is fixed at birth and cannot be changed. India's caste system has been established for the longest time. Now, a couple of things here, right? This is an entry for caste. It's not an entry for the caste system. But what happens in the explanation or the larger description? It jumps into a story about stratification and caste system.
It doesn't say what jati is. Yeah, what caste is.
Yeah, it doesn't say what caste is. It actually just it makes you basically, so, and some of our European legislative discussions have been like this as well. UK parliamentarians actually talk about the need to eliminate caste. Because you see, you have to get into their baggage framework. What kind of baggage are they in? Whenever they use the word caste, and I'm still prepared to concede that India has caste, but it doesn't have caste system. In the story that Europeans tell, caste entails the caste system, or a caste system is entailed whenever you talk about caste, right? In the same way, your description is a perfect match to that, right? But it only makes sense if we buy into the European story. It doesn't make sense otherwise. It doesn't tell us anything real about Indian social structures. I'm not competent, although that blog article I mentioned, it was written in relation to this Bhima Koregaon controversy, but I was using that as a hook to make some other points about how it's important to Dalits and that side and this and that. But in that article, I also said, look, if you look at Dalit, right? Dalit isn't a conceptual category. There's nothing that unifies the alleged conceptual category that
Dalit is not a caste.
Yeah, Dalit is there's no conceptual unity to the idea of Dalit. Dalit is just made up of a diverse number of different jatis, right? What makes them all equally oppressed? What even makes them oppressed, right? The wording of oppression and so on actually comes from a European framework, not from Indian framework.
Well, probably we are overshooting time. I will take one part. Bhima Koregaon we will not go because that's a different debate. But the question you said is eradication of caste system is a solution. So in our story, there are jatis in India. There is no jati vyavasthe. So therefore, you can fight endlessly. Since it doesn't exist, you can't eliminate it. Because you are actually trying to eliminate something that doesn't exist. Take it, because there is 2-century history of Jatpat Todak Mandal from there till now. Nobody has found anything reasonable. 2 century, literally. Okay. Now,
Short question, if it's okay.
1 minute, I will just complete. Now, your question can be tackled in if you have studied logic a bit. Your question is pretty tricky. Say, for example, somebody comes to you and say, I have lost interest to live in this world. So you will not tell him, go and commit suicide. You don't say. See, in order to suggest that you should die, you need completely different reasons. Though you don't have interest to live, doesn't necessarily mean that you should go and die. So having no interest to live in this world is not the argument for committing suicide. See, this is logical distinction. I'm making it simplified. I'm not getting into the technical part. Now, assume that there are problems with jati. All kinds of problems. Take it for granted. Now, having problems with jati is not necessarily imply that jatis had to be eliminated. It is a logical problem. In fact, it is irrational to argue because they belong to different kinds of logical systems. So if you say jati has a problem, therefore get rid of it. So your leg has a pain, so cut it. Now, see, this is logical flaw. So, and we have persistently carried this logical flaws of all kinds for almost 2 centuries now. I mean, this is an academic answer that because since you are a student and law students are involved in reasoning in law, I mean, which is very important part. So I said, see, this is how logic operates. And I tried bringing it into the common sense way of understanding how there are different things in logic. So logical flaws are something that we're picking up and saying as if they're the truth and the solutions. How can illogical solution, in the realm of logic, can be a practical solution to some problem? Impossible. It has never such a thing has happened. So, I mean, your question actually says more about it. So your question, we will continue the chat after the talk since we have overshot the time.
Right.
So I'm really pleased. A lot of you have asked questions. I'm sure you have lot more to ask. If anyone wants to continue conversation with Prakash Bhai, you can messages online. You Google Prakash Shah. I mean, you will get his email ID. You can write to him.
No problem.
So, and he has incredible patience. He will respond, and that is true. And so, he's not lazy like us, but he's really good in responding. So, I think you all have been benefited by it. And from Aarohi side, we are extremely thankful that all of you have come here on a working day in the evening. And I'm very, very grateful to Prakash Bhai for being here.